Yeah, well, first of all, it's not just 20 or 30 years. I mean, it's kind of always been described as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. And we didn't hear differently until about, I don't know, like less than a week before they released the official numbers for the second quarter. And obviously, the Biden administration was leaked that GDP report. They knew in advance that it was going to be negative. And it wasn't until then that they came out with this ridiculous explanation or excuse that 2 negative quarters of GDP do not constitute a recession, because prior to that knowledge, they were pretending we had a strong economy. They kept talking about how strong the economy was. Well, it's been in recession the entire year.
Absolutely. And so now with the official numbers coming out, second quarter gross domestic product fell 0.9%, though it was expected to rise 0.3%. We get a very different sounding message. Now, I just, want the audience to understand the administration made perfectly clear, just like Peter did and like everybody did, what would mean we're in a recession. And that is 2 consecutive periods, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. They've been saying that all along. Even the Biden administration officials have been saying that. It wasn't until it actually happened to him that they and their media allies completely changed, did a 180, and started to say it's a very different story. Okay, so here's the first soundbite. It's soundbite 1, where you can hear the media and Biden administration officials trying to tell us black is not black, white is white, not white. This is actually all Biden admin officials. So take a listen to them.
I mean, if the technical definition is 2 quarters of contraction, you're saying that's not a recession?
That's not the technical definition.
2 negative quarters of GDP growth is not the technical definition of recession.
The idea that 2 quarters of negative GDP growth is a technical definition of a recession is wrong.
How is that not redefining recession?
Because that's not the definition.
What we're seeing is that we are in a transition.
We've entered a new phase in our recovery.
Virtually nothing signals that this period in the second quarter is recessionary.
That doesn't sound like a recession to me.
Okay, so the rules have changed for no particular reason other than they're just looking at other standards. They're looking at other pieces of the economy that they say are doing well, like low unemployment, and saying that changes the rules entirely.
Yeah, I guess they believe if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. But imagine, Megan, if Donald Trump tried to do the same thing. What if Trump were president and we had 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, and then Donald Trump tried to redefine recession to claim that we were not in one? Do you think the media would go along with that?
Mm-hmm. Correct. No, never. And the media is going along with it because those are the Biden administration officials. I mean, including Janet Yellen, right? Like, it's not the technical definition to say that 2 quarters of contraction is a recession. Since when?
It is.
Since when?
It is the technical definition. That's the definition. And, even Fed Chair Powell, they got to him. They were able to intimidate him. So anybody who thinks the Fed is independent, now you have Chair Powell claiming that 2 negative quarters is not a recession and we're not in a recession. But, Megan, 2 negative quarters is just a minimum for a recession. We're going to get a 3rd negative quarter. We're going to get a 4th negative quarter. We're going to be seeing contracting GDP for years. This recession is just getting started. And the increase in unemployment is coming. People that are pointing to the low unemployment rate and saying this means we're not in recession, that's nonsense. Unemployment is a lagging indicator. The unemployment rate is going to rise as the recession continues. But also, Megan, they're trying to claim that we're not in a recession because we have a strong labor market. We don't. We have a very weak labor market. Real wages are collapsing. Wages have never really fallen this much in real terms in history. That is a weak labor market. When you have a strong labor market, workers can demand raises. They have power. They can go to their bosses and say, I want more money, or I'm going to quit and take another job. That's not happening. Workers are being forced to work for pay cuts. In fact, a lot of workers are taking 2nd jobs and 3rd jobs because they can't make ends meet on their main job. That is a weak labor market.
So you're saying when inflation's at 9.1% and you're only getting a 5% raise, what you've really had is a 4% pay cut, and that's not a strong labor market.
Correct. I mean, let's say we had inflation and a strong labor market, which is what they're pretending. If inflation was 9%, workers would be getting 12% pay raises. They would be ahead of inflation. The fact that they're accepting raises that are much smaller than inflation shows that this is a weak labor market. Workers have no power. They are forced to accept lower wages because the labor market is so weak.
Before we get into that, because I do want to ask you a little bit more about the wages, on the administration contradictions, I just want to point this out. All right, first there is Biden's National Economic Council Director, Brian Deese. In March of 2008, I think he was working for the Biden administration, he said, economists have a technical definition of recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Now, he's with Biden, 2 negative quarters of GDP growth is not the technical definition of recession. So which is it? I mean, it's a 100%, 180 reversal by him. Biden's chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Cecilia Rose, in May of 2022, 2 quarters of negative growth is an indicator of recession. Now, as of July 21st in a White House blog post, what is a recession? Some say it's 2 consecutive quarters of falling real GDP. And she goes on to say, that's neither the official definition nor the way economists evaluate the state of the business cycle. She just said in May, 2 quarters of negative growth is an indicator of recession. Then you got Jared Bernstein. He's the economic advisor. Wait, I got two more. September of 19, he says a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining growth. Now, that idea is, quote, wrong. And then you got Heather Bosey, his economic advisor. May 2019, a recession refers to 2 quarters of negative growth in GDP. Now, that does not necessarily indicate we're in a recession. Okay. Peter, I can't.
Well, look, I'm 59 years old, all right? And I have never in my life heard a recession defined any other way other than 2 negative quarters of GDP. That's the definition, because recession refers to whether or not the GDP is expanding or contracting. It doesn't refer to the level of unemployment or the level of inflation. It specifically is there to reference what is happening with GDP. Right? That's how they define economic growth. I mean, I have a lot of problems with GDP, but that's how recession has been defined. Recovery is when the GDP is expanding. Recession is when it's contracting. That's it. And if you've got 2 negative quarters in a row, you're in a recession. Now, maybe it's a shallow recession. Maybe it's going to be over quickly. Now, I don't think so. I think we're just early in this recession. I think the 3rd quarter is going to be even weaker than the first 2. In fact, I think they're going to revise the 2nd quarter number even lower. And I was not surprised by that negative number. I expected it. And in fact, last year, I expected the 1st quarter to be negative. I was forecasting that the U.S. economy would be in recession in the first half of 2022 back in 2021. And by the way, back in 2021, I was also forecasting that inflation was not transitory and that it would get worse. I said inflation would strengthen and the economy would weaken. We would have stagflation. And that is exactly what